Yeah, mic's fine. Yeah. So I should ask a famous question. Is everybody here? Okay, so we get started again today. A few announcements before I get started. Shin Aizawa won't be here till this evening, unfortunately. And so his talk is taken up by Utpal Banerjee, who has about 3 or 4 seminars ready at short notice, so he'll give a great talk. The other thing is that we will have this session beamed outside and in the LH1, but this evening's reminiscences also will be beamed on the deck outside. Good. So it's sort of difficult to give these kinds of review talks because the audience is usually composed of people who know every detail. More important, it also has people who have views, which is troublesome. And then there are people who don't know many of the details. And then there are others who are actually absolutely fresh to the campus. So who do you actually address such talks to? And I think the nervousness comes when you see someone like Govind Swarup. Where's he gone? There's he, yeah. In the audience. And because, you know, every single detail about the Tata Institute and how the centers grew and so on, he has on his fingertips. So you get worried about getting all these facts right. But I think the very nice thing about NCBS is every year there's a substantial change in our community. People come in and go out. And perhaps it might be best that you know, such talks be addressed to that community, our students and postdocs and JRFs, so that the word spreads and we actually also cater to their interests and needs scientifically, or address those kinds of questions each time when we do our science. So that's what I'll try and do a bit today. So there'll be a lot of repetition about things some of us know in great detail, but it'll also be new for many of us. So it's 20 years since we started, and actually this is a number which is fiction in some sense, in many ways, because really, you know, the period from our growth from 0 to about 30 groups in about 20 years actually has a period before our start, a formal start, which is very important. So the time before t equals 0 is always very important. And that we heard a lot about yesterday when we were felicitating Ubaid, because really it's that period of thinking of what to do, what not to do, how to do it, and so on, which actually sets the initial conditions of any institution. And in many ways, that's the much, much harder part than finding the resources and getting started. The trouble often is that once one gets the legal setup done so that resources flow in and you can get started, institutional culture has a danger of forgetting this t less than 0 period. And I should say that right from the beginning, that we have been very lucky that we've actually reset ourselves to keep in mind our core values and culture, as it were. So when you start is important, and before you start is important, but also the boundary conditions we set are very important. And this is a bit more complicated because, you know, we always set our boundary conditions about, you know, who to deal with, why and when and where, depending on a sort of static picture of today. We also have some sense of the dynamics of what is right around us. But interestingly, most of us as scientists derive a picture of what is good in science and what should be done from the period when we were students and postdocs, and keep that as a static picture throughout our lives. Yet the world is changing constantly, and is changing for the worse in many ways and changing for the better in many ways. What aspects do we change in our boundary conditions and what do we not is always a challenge. So we should be a porous membrane defining, you know, what comes in and what goes out, and that's never easy. One of the most difficult things in starting institutions, of course, is the first few days, and the extraordinary difficulties illustrated in the next slide over here in the bottom left-hand side corner, where these people are having a good time. So this was actually a very interesting T less than 0 period, where because of the connection with the molecular biology unit in Bombay and being based in Bombay at the Tata Institute and in the kind of culture which we heard a lot about yesterday, that actually one could worry about science and how to do it and what is interesting and what is not, while also worrying about details about how things could grow. And that was really a fantastic location to be in. It's also one which you don't feel like leaving. And people, whenever you join a place, when you're supposed to go on to another location and start, build your own campus and go on and so forth, the first thing they ask you when you join is, when are you going? But on the other hand, this is such a wonderful place, you don't feel like going. That's what worries the people who are there. But anyway, we did have a great base in Bombay. People like Giant and Matthew and Panix, Gaithi started their labs over there. And it was a very valuable time because that actually built the bonds with Bombay rather deeply, which have lasted and continue to, those bonds continue to grow. The Bangalore connection came about in ways which again go several years backwards from T = 0. And it's good to get a sense of that. It actually goes back to a period quite a while ago when Satish Dhawan was the director of the Indian Institute of Science. And there were discussions about, if I'm not mistaken, initiated by him, about starting a mathematics program in collaboration with TIFR at the Indian Institute of Science campus. So that really was the start of the Mathematics Center at the Indian Institute of Science, the TIFR Mathematics Center, and that collaboration was very sort of new, in the sense it's the first time that two such major institutions had this kind of a collaboration. It also had its ups and downs, and there's a lot of interesting things to learn from that, but that's another topic. The idea of setting up a National Center for Biological Sciences and the possibility of it being in Bangalore was something which Obaid discussed with another director of the Indian Institute of Science, RAMASESHAN. And again, as Balram mentioned yesterday, RAMASESHAN was extraordinarily enthusiastic about the idea and yet had to deal with the local logistics of doing so. So Dhawan and RAMASESHAN were very valuable in encouraging interinstitutional interactions. And this is not something which is to be taken lightly. I'll say a little more about this later. But the immediate response across the world of any institution when another says, I'd like to do something with you, is to ask why and when will you leave. And it's not usual to get a welcoming response from heads of institutions or from within the institutions. And in a context where there is so little science at the high end in India, it would be, one would think this would be counterintuitive. We should be doing the opposite. Yet it doesn't happen very often, and therefore these two people, Dhawan and RAMASESHAN, one should be very, very grateful to. Another director of the Indian Institute of Science was also in his own and very different way. Each of these people, by the way, Dhawan and RAMASESHAN, are very different people. And there's a very nice obituary for RAMASESHAN written by Balram in the Hindu, which points out, how valuable these two people were, yet how different they were. And a very different person, again, from the Indian Institute of Science, is C.N.R. Rao, who, as the director of the Indian Institute of Science, that was a time when NCBS wanted to have a base in Bangalore while moving to our own campus. And Govind Swarup, who's here, headed the Radio Astronomy Center, then at UT, and they had just made plans and moved on to Pune to set up the National Center for Radio Astrophysics, as it was later called, and the giant meter wave radio telescope. And the TIFR Center building, which is shown here, which housed the TIFR IISC Maths Interaction, also was a base for the Radio Astronomy Center. And the Radio Astronomy Center was based here, and people shuttled between there to Uti. Vijay Kapai, Govind Swarup, several others built a fantastic Uti radio telescope. And those of you who get a chance should go over there. It's a fantastic place. But the offices were based in Bangalore here at the Indian Institute of Science campus. The other use of that TIFR Center building was by our protein biophysicists and those who used NMR for other purposes, who used to come to Bangalore regularly and stay here at the guest house while using the NMR at the Indian Institute of Science. So when C.N.R. Rao was the director of the Indian Institute of Science was when the idea to have a temporary lab in the IISC campus came up, and the thought was that as Swaroop and his gang vacated, could we use that space to set up our labs? And I don't have it now, but on me right now, but you should be able to dig up that letter. There's a letter from Ubaid to C.N.R. Rao asking whether this could be done, and the typical answer, I would say today, would be to form a committee to examine this and see what happens. And the answer would be, we would love to have you here, but there's no space, and there are all sorts of plans we have. It's really wonderful, such a great institution. We wish you all the best. Go elsewhere. But C.N.R. Rao wrote back, I think, almost instantly, a letter in which, on the margin, he marks the place where Ubaid asked for permission to be there and says, yes, done. And that's the speed at which he worked. And, many people like us sitting here discussing science, when we look at people like Dhawan, RAMASESHAN, or C.N.R. Rao, other heads of institutions, we have the luxury of saying, why didn't he do this, or why didn't she do this, and so on and so forth. And we are often very critical of not only what they are doing or not doing, but also of their motives. But it is also important, many people, while being hamstrung by their context, there are people who dare to do things despite their context, and C.N.R. Rao certainly was one. He did this in many other ways too. We set up our labs at the TIFR Center campus. One of the problems was getting accommodation for people who moved into Bangalore. Matthew moved in amongst the earliest. And Matthew, I think, again, Ubaid wrote asking whether, some of our faculty could get accommodation there. And he ran into Matthew and basically told him that, don't worry, I've got a place for you, and that was done. And he got IISC accommodation right away. So he was very quick and very helpful. So that was incredibly valuable. So these three people then allowed NCBS to grow from Bombay over here in surroundings in a building which was really not made for a laboratory. So it was actually a huge challenge, perhaps, because not that much of a challenge, because there's not too much to buy and set up at that time. I'll come to the issue of money if I have some time. But anyway, the lab started here and things functioning. I think this photograph is taken in about 1993 or so, and this is the entire NCBS faculty, staff, students, drivers, everyone over here in this photograph. Yeah. There's Shashi, Sudhir, Sahadevan, Shanta, Preeta. Well, you can recognize with Hispanics, just back from Cold Spring Harbor or somewhere. Yeah, so the science grew there rather rapidly, and people established very large groups. Here's a very large group. Another large group. And that's Jitu in his lab. And there was a lot of time for fun and games. This is the slow cycling competition. And people went out and ordered coffee, I think. Are they ordering coffee? I don't know what they're doing here. Yeah. Some people started demanding that we should have, courses and, be rigorous in our teaching and so on. And they came early for class. Not many takers for courses at the time. So, by the time we got extremely comfortable and very happy over there, there was this feeling developing that, things are fantastic. You cycle around the campus, it's beautiful. You go to the coffee board, you do your science, you're having fun. And then in parallel, something was looming, which is the, search for this campus had been completed in a rather interesting and complicated way. That actually had an interesting history in itself. When the proposal went to the government, there were two kinds of responses, three kinds really. One is, India is a very small country, so they said, CCMB already exists, why do you want another biology institute? So that was a very good reason, and that had to be countered. The second was that you want to have something in biology and in the University of Agricultural Sciences campus. This should be under the department, under the Indian Council for Agricultural Research. Or it's biology, should be under the Department of Biotechnology. Or, you're trying to have everything in Bangalore, you should go to some extremely underdeveloped part of the country, such as Pune, and set up an institute over there. So each of these kinds of things were actually side trips which eventually resulted. Ubaid likes to say that if there's any obstacle, you should just wait for the people who are responsible for it to retire, and all of them did. And eventually we ended up here. So the idea was to move into this campus and set up things. And those of you who see this extraordinarily green campus right now would be forgiven for assuming that it was actually a lot greener, and we cut down a huge number of trees to build this campus and buildings. And that couldn't be further from the truth. Actually, this is a sort of relatively green view, but the campus was extremely bad. That's actually where the teak plantation is being set up outside the campus. This is before the teaks came in, and that's the housing. This is the housing area towards you. And this is how the campus looked like, general shrub and almost no trees over there. So Purnima and Jayant were responsible for really getting lots of the trees over here. The construction, here's the main gate. We have a very nice pond over there near the canteen, and it was always a challenge to keep the water in. The pond is really nice because it harvests all the rainwater from the campus, the sewage treated water, and then allows it to be recycled. So it's really a nice pond. And all of us blame Jayant because the pond till last year used to keep leaking, and all the water used to go away to China. And we had to figure out how to actually plug the leak. But actually, Jayant is not to blame. The pond was always a leaky pond. It actually is a lot less leaky now. So things have actually, in many ways, changed for the better in terms of our ecology around. This is, I think, Bhutal Singh Bhalla, and that's a new buildings coming up. A dangerous dude. When he gets into construction without, without us knowing. We also, in our plans for the building, the older building, they were very carefully crafted. There was again a major hurdle which, and Ubaid insisted that we choose our own architect instead of choosing the architect assigned by the Department of Atomic Energy, and that was a huge challenge, but finally that got done, and plans were drawn up. And it's unusual in that we actually, all of us interacted a lot with the architect to try and ensure that the laboratory was very carefully designed, internally and functionally useful to all of us, and every aspect of what we need was present in the master plan and design, and that really worked out extremely well. We were so focused on what we were doing that we forgot that we needed an animal house. And this is the animal house we constructed after the building was ready, while we actually developed new plans again for our current animal house. So the entire animal house was right there. That was an intentional spelling mistake. So just as today, we all gathered in this makeshift auditorium with a danger of, falling down the steps and so on. We had our seminars over there in the previous lecture hall, sitting on the floor in some cases or on chairs on the others, and that got started off quite well. Some years after we had moved in, we decided to have a formal inauguration to make sure that everything was in place, rather than do it before everything was in place. And the TIFR Council of Management, whose chair is Ratan Tata, decided that he wanted to explore the possibilities of cellular immortality and came to Purva's lab. Then there was, in the pond over there, there's a plaque which you can't easily see because of the shrub now. And the Council of Management walked into that plaque, into the pond, which is dry, and unveiled the plaque, and there was a big ceremony there. And I was at the airport supposed to bring Ratan Tata in over here from the airport, and which I did. And that was the early days of the mobile phone, and I got a call reading out the text of what was there in the plaque to me. And unfortunately, instead of saying that this plaque was unveiled by, it says this plague was unveiled by. but fortunately, because of the traffic, there was enough time to actually correct the error and delete that part. So the buildings came up well, as you can see now. And so let's very quickly take a student and postdoc-centric perspective of where we are going. Now, one of the interesting things which happened to us as investigators in a lab is we, over a period of time, think of institutions as something which rightly belong to us and enabling us to do our science. But that view becomes extraordinarily self-centered in some contexts. So, students and postdocs and others are people who are supposed to enable our science. The administration is supposed to enable our science. And all this is very well if the definition of our science is a broader one, which encompasses the changing views of science. But oftentimes, because science does require us to focus and get things done, we dilute that broader view and try to focus on our interest in getting our work done, which is it has its merit. It also has its problems, obviously. So in terms of students and postdocs, however, they are a changing population, and they also have a changing view of what science is about. People come in with all sorts of reasons. They transform, they get inspired, they get depressed, they get excited, and then they leave and they do new kinds of things. So, I mean, there are aspects, therefore, which are distinct from the previous one, which is much more centered. So how does one balance these kinds of things? And of course, what I mentioned about courses, that's one very important aspect. We as a research institution, technically, till recently have the luxury of not having worried about courses and saying that, look, people come here after an undergraduate training, they should all be up to a certain standard. We interview them, let's get on and do our work. And that works if you're selecting a very small number of students who have a similar background and they're ready for research. But oftentimes, as one grows, that's not easy to do. So courses are very important, and they need to be structured beyond our intrinsic capabilities. And that's been an interesting challenge, and we've dealt with that. So students and postdocs and the graduate program have evolved substantially. The graduate program, I should say, has two components. One, the Tata Institute is now a university, so it awards its own degrees, and we have students from all over the world, all over India coming in substantially, and few from outside coming to this program. But we also continue our previous affiliations with other universities, and therefore students can also register in these other universities and get a degree. And what we are pushing now is that other interesting program which has started by individual interactions and will grow more formally as the size of that grows, is to have our student programs much more interactive with universities in India and abroad, either by having joint students or joint degrees or dual degrees and so on. And those kinds of possibilities typically, again, are met with reactions from investigators saying, why shouldn't we do it? Why do we need this? It's a problem for me or my lab or my institution. But from a student's perspective, if one finds the students are excited, maybe there's something over there. So those kinds of interactions, I think, are certainly likely to grow. The other kind of interaction, which again has grown accidentally, which probably will become much more integrated and formalized, is our engagement with wildlife, shown here. And this is the master's program in wildlife biology, which started by Ullas Karant and Anindya Sinha wanting to use our space for teaching wildlife biology to students. That matured to a genuinely collaborative program with a degree being awarded by Manipal University and now a degree being awarded by the Tata Institute. But this is a key aspect of our research, actually, which, if it were integrated into cell and molecular biology in interesting ways, allows our science to look within the country for exciting opportunities there. And for example, we had a wonderful talk a few weeks ago by Ian Baldwin from the Max Planck Institute for Chemical Ecology, integrating how plant host interactions, plant-parasite interactions function, and how dissecting that is really informative both for ecology as well as for cell biology. So that's something which will grow in a new integrated way. Our graduate programs and collaborations will grow, but also our meetings and workshops, which so far have been growing on, as we each of us need basis, needs to change in a manner where there's a formal meetings and workshops office, which is in many ways integrated with science, yet allows us to be a lot freer in managing the meetings and workshops. And then Nidhi and the team will have incorporated other people so that that can grow a lot better. And that means that we need to actually increase on our campus housing, our guest house and so on, which is very, extremely modest over there. And our catering will also have to change rather substantially, our recreation facilities and so on. And these things I'm mentioning because, and I'll come again towards the end, with the growth of our campus, with the addition of the INSTEM labs, which has given us another 20 acres to expand, we will have substantial space for actually expanding these kinds of resources to make sure that our campus is integrated in terms of these needs. I'll just take a few minutes more. So in terms now of our science, I have 5 minutes, right? Yeah. In terms of our science, I think our uniqueness comes both from biology, because it's genetic and cellular mechanisms across scale, across evolution, allow different kinds of science to be naturally under one roof. The problem which we recognize is that a standalone biology institute is dangerous. Biology is too important to be left just to biologists, and our constant challenge, therefore, is to integrate with not only other biologists elsewhere, but with other kinds of science elsewhere. And I'll come to that in a little later. And that's something which we're aware of, and I think it's not something to be depressed about by any means. So the science really has grown by a mix of a whole range of people, and 20 years plus is not a bad time to look back and ask, how have we done? Typically, when institutions start, we tend to say, give us a little more time, let's see what's happening. So 50 years of biology in Bombay, 20 years over here, 60 or 70 years of the Tata Institute, 100 years of the IISC. It's a good time to look back and see how have these people done, how have we as individuals who have been here for a long time done, and where have our students gone, who wants to hire us if we want to leave, who wants to come and join us, who wants to come and spend sabbaticals, who likes our science, what do they say about it, and these are things which all of us can look around and look at. But I'll end now by saying that, building these kinds of institutions require 4 kinds of personalities, and we've been very fortunate in having those personalities. So I'll give you examples of those personalities. They are, of course, extraordinarily important as individuals, but they're also placeholders for the kind of people which I think generally one needs. And this is not unimportant in today's context, particularly for our students and postdocs who will go to other institutions. There are about 30 or 40 new large institutions which have been started in the last few years in India. And the joke is that if you walk around in any city in India, you might be made a professor. So there are many opportunities in India now. So it's important, to see, how one grows institutions and learn from mistakes and learn from the good things. And quite often these places look for this magical one person who can, change the place or grow the place. And that usually doesn't happen. You can't find that magical person, and usually hasn't happened in many places. So I'll give you an example of these 4 kinds of people. First of all, in the early stages, but at every stage, you need an engagement with the outside world. And quite often, institutional heads are told, focus on getting things right inside, we need to deal with our stuff, and some amount of isolation is important. But isolation without being connected with the real world outside, within the country and outside, is dangerous. You need to have a person or a group of people who can convey the importance of what one is doing and provide a protective cover so that you can grow safely. And that's very, very important. And actually, we were extraordinarily fortunate that Obaid actually served that role hugely, continues to do so, and that really allows us to carry on and focus on doing things inside, because the image of the place, the importance of what we're doing, the removal of hurdles at the highest level, this kind of a personality is immensely important. The other kind of personality is sort of a ground level, constant reminder of what our core purpose and values are. It's all too easy to get caught in dealing with the immediate and forgetting that, because the days usually goes in coming in and dealing with all sorts of minor crises, and before you know, you've hired a set of people that's taken on directions without standing back and thinking whether those were the correct things to do. So scientifically, in terms of scientific direction and administrative direction, it's important to have a compass which will keep correcting you and making sure that you're going in that right direction. And Veronica was really extraordinarily valuable in that, both because of her international perspective, but also because of her deep roots in the molecular biology unit in Bombay and her shared values with what we were doing. On the ground, it's important for process to be merged with culture in a manner where both are preserved. So you need to make sure that there's rigor in what one does and things actually get done. Otherwise, we end up talking about how places should be and forget that, we should be such a place. And that kind of a, work on the ground was done hugely by Jan3, both before we started and later as Dean. And finally, we need membranes, porous membranes, to constantly change, to challenge us, to make us feel tense whether we are doing good things, and if not, how the future is. And Jitu will be talking a little later today about what he thinks the future in science is, but he's been absolutely extraordinary in making sure that we are contemporary in a global scientific context, and that's been very valuable. But these really, I wouldn't, except for Veronica, the rest are here, so it's not something meant to tell you about them, but more about the kind of people which institutions continue to need and renew. So our own science, you're all familiar with. I won't go into that. Again, to say that, Upi and Apurva here are placeholders for the very important kinds of roles they're playing in making sure that our infrastructure works and our academic programs work, and there'll be a lot more we can talk about that. You also know that with the growth of INSTEM around us, we are trying to do, because of time, I won't go into this, I'll head on to this final part over here, that the idea here at INSTEM is to try and see whether there are problems in human biology. And as Mrigank said very nicely, all problems are basic, including translational ones. Whether one can, in a context where we already have a foundation, particularly in cell and molecular biology, whether one can bring in team-driven efforts to address complicated, interesting questions in human biology by getting the best people to come and work here. And these are examples of the kinds of things starting either at INSTEM or at NCBS or collaboration with INSTEM and NCBS, and we'll talk a little more about it. But the very last slide then, I would like to talk a little more about this, but later. But the last slide then brings me to the final point about how science is changing around us. And by accident, something strange has happened in Bangalore. We have near us the Jawaharlal Nehru Center, the Raman Institute, the Indian Institute of Science, actually the Ramaya Medical College and Engineering College, which started off as a fly-by-night operation, has become quite good. We have NIAS in terms of policy matters. And this whole area, therefore, is an interesting institutional area. And our level of interaction in this area is minimal. It's minimal because we'd like to say it's because of traffic and so on. But, and those kinds of things can be addressed. But if you actually look within some of the larger institutions, there too, the possibilities of interactions are large, but they're not substantial. So I would say one of our immediate challenges in Bangalore would be to try and increase these kinds of interactions intellectually by addressing the infrastructural problems, but not giving up by, because of immediate hurdles or a particular experience which hadn't worked out. For example, we started an MD PhD program with CMC Vellore. It hasn't really taken off, but we're working really hard to try to make it take off now. So if those kinds of programs work and we address the infrastructural problem, we are not, for example, in a luxurious situation like in many Western contexts, where we have a large campus where there are multiple institutes or departments all together over there, where we can do our interactions. We have to face the challenges of Indian roads and crossing the road to actually go across and interact with institutions. But that is actually a relatively minor physical hurdle compared to the intellectual possibilities which we need to address. For example, why not have graduate students in any of these institutes free to choose supervisors singly or jointly with people anywhere else? If you're admitted, for example, to Stanford biology as a graduate student, you can actually, if funds are available, join as a student anywhere, in any department in Stanford. I mean, the guy who you join has to find money for you, but that's a minor detail. So that kind of flexibility will actually encourage interesting science and drive students and postdocs to do what they want to do here, rather than many institutions being places where you train people to go just elsewhere. Thank you very much. Sorry? Yeah. Yeah. So as I mentioned, a slight change in the program. Shin Aizawa is not here, so Utpal will be giving a science talk in that slot. But Utpal now, against his name, he has no title for the talk. So it's a secret talk which he's figured out what to talk about. Huh? So Utpal is actually going to talk about global scientific interactions and the kind of perspectives he's been having as an NCBS board member. I just didn't get the title ready. You want to come up, Utpal? You don't have any slides.
So, good morning. My role this morning, okay, sorry. Good morning, everyone. I'm Utpal Banerjee from UCLA. My role this morning has been changing at every second of the morning, so I'm not sure what I'm supposed to say here. I realized that there was this blank left to say a few things about NCBS, which I will shorten down to about 5 or 10 minutes because I'm going to give a science talk later on. I was a postdoctoral fellow along with Vijay at about the same time at Caltech, which is where I met Vijay. And so that's a very long association. So when he was starting NCBS, he came and explained it very simply to me that all he had to do was to take DAE money and somehow connect it to the DBT money, which was going to get connected up to CSIR somehow, and IRI had to agree to do this. And I was, I simply told him that he needed a good American psychologist. However, with his Indian salary, we couldn't afford one. So I decided to step in. And since then, I've been at that role of talking to Vijay behind the scenes about what goes on at NCBS. The role as perhaps being on the board for the longest period of time is just incidental. But I take this work very, very seriously, as if in the same way as in my own institution where I chair a department and run the Stem Cell Institute. The important thing about NCBS, and it has grown over the last several years, is that all of the decisions are made by the faculty and its own management. And the idea of this board, which always has these extremely distinguished international scholars and scientists, is to remove any obstacles that might be on the way. Yesterday it was pointed out that Professor Siddiqui didn't start with 0. He started with negatives, and the point is to be able to remove anything that might come in the way. And I think it's our goal to try to see any projects which are worthwhile that then get supported and that be presented to the larger authorities with some stamp of approval of some kind. Also, it is our responsibility, of course, to make sure that the standards remain high and at an international level. To paraphrase a famous US senator, you start spending 100 crores here and 100 crores there, and very soon you're talking about real money. So at the end of the day, we have to make sure that the output has some meaning. So the final outcome is, of course, it's not a controlled experiment. The institute was not made one way and another institute allowed to proceed another way for the last 20 years to see which one worked out better. It was through microscopic decision-making process. And these decisions, it's interesting to sit through them and see how people decide on these. It's not always obvious. For example, one question that came up over and over and over again in every of the early meetings was, is it better to have an institution where large numbers of fields of biology are represented, or shouldn't one be starting institution in India where, say, a problem which is of relevance to India be solved? This was a question that came up in every meeting I remember for a very long time. Why not have a malaria institute within NCBS, which then would be, in a targeted way, try to get a lot of Gates Foundation money or whatever, and be able to make a real dent in an important problem. And there were all these practical reasons why that was not necessary and didn't happen. One of the things that it's, if you start with an institute like that, then every year you'll have to find the best person working on that particular field and try to attract such persons. And yet NCBS was getting applications from the best person working on any field, and to be turning them away and having a system which was only towards one goal did not seem appropriate. To me, it was a no-brainer to do it the way it was done. And it's a no-brainer, not from some hugely philosophical point of view, or from the point of view of the faculty and what they gained, and from the point of view of science or India, as John Nichols so nicely pointed out. Education, value of education goes beyond all decisions of current finances and current decision making. So the question then becomes, who is it that benefits most from this model? And without any questions, the students alone. By having this diversity of faculty, the future leaders who are going to come back and rebuild this country and are going to build the science here are now being produced by the absolute best people who are coming back. And that by itself justifies the model that has been developed here over the last 20 years. And I don't think we need to apologize for not solving malaria here. There are other institutions which are doing just fine, and I'm sure they will do just well. And the other question was, which institution should we be like? Are we going to be like Harvard? Are we going to be like LMB? Are we going to be like Cold Spring Harbor? Are we going to be like one of these institutions? Sitting in UCLA, I get similar questions all the time. Why are we not like the Broad Institute and the Stem Cell Institute here? Once again, I think the decision here is, let's try to be like NCBS. There are unique opportunities and there are unique problems. It's not so easy for us to send out an ad in Cell Science or Nature and say, let's get the best person of any nationality to show up and become the professor here. So let's just build NCBS with the people who are interested in coming here, not by providing huge quantities of funds to the one or two luminaries in the world who might be willing to come here and spend a few years here. But for people who are willing to come here and develop this place as their own and as a really great place, they can be of any nationality, and this will happen in the next 5 to 10 years for sure. And once that happens, then the rest of the institutions in India can decide whether they would like to be NCBS, not like to be NCBS, and if they do not like to be NCBS, what kind of changes they would wish to make. And they can go from there on. So if you detect a little bit of arrogance in the way I say all of this, is because we are still getting over being a teenager. We do understand that as we turn 20, that there are a great deal of responsibilities, and as that responsibility, just like my teenagers are now going off to college, we will become very responsible citizens. And as we become responsible citizens, our 3 primary goals will be, number 1, that rapid expansion is the time when most things collapse, because that expansion, as all the physicists will tell you, cause enormous cooling down. So that is an issue. Connectivity with other institutions is an absolute must. This place growing as a silo is not going to work, and therefore creating better and better connectivity. This amazing connectivity with INSTEM, which we fought very hard to make sure that it was inside this campus, that it was developed and nurtured here. That's a very positive thing forward. But then with all of these resources, they'll get opened up to be used by outsiders to come in. The courses and the educational agenda that this place will open up for the rest of the places, that's what we are going to be known for at NCBS, and not just the science that comes out of here. That, of course, is a necessity that will be demanded of us, but the other part will also be something we promise that I think we will deliver. Thank you, and I'll come back with the science talk later.